Hey, welcome. My name is, again, Chris Lorenzo, and this is my talk I called Polymer Changes Everything. This is Rob Dotson's talk, so I'm going to be presenting his slides as if they were my own. And first thing I wanted to ask, how many people are using a front-end framework, such as like React or Angular or Ember.js or Vue.js? How many people are using Polymer? Probably not many yet. Well, we got a couple. That's why he's interested in hearing about this. All right, so that's cool. So in order to start talking about Polymer, we first have to talk about jam. Everybody likes jam here. I noticed that they have strawberry jam in these little cup things little cones that you put the strawberry jam in. So a few years ago, there was a study done, and they took two groups of people to a market, and they gave them a $1 off coupon to buy jam. And in the first group, they presented 6 jars of jam to the first group. And they could taste them, check them out, feel them, approach them, whatever. And then they were free to go about doing their shopping. And the second group of people, they presented a large assortment of jams. And they had all different types of jams. And the people could also try them out, taste them, look at them. It was really fancy. People would spend a lot of time trying each different flavor. But the important part was, after they tried all the jams and they actually went to buy them, the group that had to choose between 6 jars of jam, 30% of the people bought a jar of jam. And with the ones that had to look at 24 jars of jam, only 3% purchased them. And the reason why that's important is Adi Osmani, who's a Google developer, summed it up with, when we're presented with an abundance of choice, you can feel increasingly unsure of whether yours is the right one. And this is kind of how it is on the front end. Every 6 months, there's a new front-end library that's developed. I was impressed just by seeing Skate.js as another web components library. I've never heard of it. And there was, a whole bunch of different ones. There's Riot.js, which is another one which wasn't up there. But again, there's a new framework on the front end every 6 months. And so here's actually a summary of how popular Angular is, React, Ember, Knockout.js. I know Vue.js was another one that we have that's pretty popular. And it's kind of amazing because some of these libraries are written by one person. And they're created by one person, they're maintained by one person, which is also kind of scary because if that one person gets hit by a bus, yes, it's open source, you can continue to maintain it, but nobody's doing the core development. And so the other problem with all these different frameworks is, let's say you pick Angular or you pick React. Once you start developing that, you can't take an Angular directive and drop it into a React component and expect it to work. That's kind of the fundamental problem with all these frameworks. And that's where web components come in. This is a new fundamental API on the browser, which is supposed to bring interoperability. So again, now we can actually define a web component as part of the browser. It's a spec. And they're not like any of the frameworks have been doing before. Web components are low-level primitives that let you define your own HTML elements. As we saw with the vanilla web components, you can actually not use a div tag. You can create whatever he called it, whatever his element was. And the reason why you can do that is because we have these 4 specs. So if you try to look up web components, there's no W3C spec for web components. It's actually 4 different specs: template, shadow DOM, custom elements, and HTML imports. Those are the 4 specs that make up web components. Templates, which was skipped over in the vanilla JS section, template is a new tag. It's just the template tag. And you can put whatever markup you want inside of that template tag. And the browser completely ignores it. So it will parse it, but it won't do anything. It stays inert, meaning that if you put an image tag inside of a template tag and it has a source, the browser is actually not going to download the image. It basically allows you to create snippets of code that you can use with JavaScript. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. Shadow DOM, you had a good overview of that. It's basically encapsulating your components so you don't have to worry about styles leaking out. Custom elements is the spec that allows you to actually register your own tag name. And HTML imports is kind of one of my favorite, which is on the fence because of ES6 modules. HTML imports allow you to import an HTML page inside of another HTML page, which sounds kind of weird, but it's actually pretty powerful, and the Polymer team uses it heavily. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So the other cool part is the Polymer team is the one who's been pushing for web components, and you don't get web components to all the browsers unless all the browser vendors are on board. And Google's really been bringing them to the table. So here's a quote from Mozilla. Everyone is talking about web components. Web components have been in planning for over 3 years. So the original spec, I think, was like 2012 or 2013 when they started proposing it. And now we're in 2016, so it's been a really long time. But we're optimistic the end is near. All major vendors are on board, enthusiastic, and investing significant time to help resolve the remaining issues. So that's Mozilla. Microsoft, with their Edge browser, is happy to announce that we are starting development to add HTML template element support to Microsoft today. This is just the beginning of our web components journey. The next goal is to implement Shadow DOM. So this is definitely coming to browsers. And by the way, like the template tag is probably the easiest thing to implement. I mean, they added a new tag which does nothing. So way to go, Microsoft. Thank you. All it has to do is ignore everything that was put inside of it. Really hard work there. Great developers. And then last we have Safari, who is also making great support with Shadow DOM. As you saw, Safari 10 will have Shadow DOM in it by default. All the major browsers have the template tag available now, so you can actually start using the template tag, again, because it was really easy to implement. So all the browsers are moving towards this standard, and the Polymer team expects all the browsers to have it fully available within a year, meaning everyone will have native support for web components. And what this allows us to do is build our libraries on top of them. And that's kind of what Polymer does, is when you have these native APIs that are in the browser, you still want to put a little bit of sugar on top to make it easier and more friendly for developers to build stuff on top of it. And that's what Polymer is. Polymer is syntactic sugar on top of the Web Components API, which makes it a lot easier to write than vanilla web components. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. And just to be clear, Polymer is not a framework like all the other frameworks like React and Angular. And the way that you know whether a library is a library or a framework is if you go to their website and they tell you it's a library or a framework. So that's really the only way of knowing. React is actually not a framework either. It's another library for a front end. And really, the point is that this is important because the web platform is your browser. And web components are meant to sit right on top of the web platform, meaning you can write a web component using Vanilla.js or Polymer, and you can use it in React, you can use it in Angular, you can use it in Ember, you can use it in Vue. It doesn't matter because it works with the browser, not with a framework. And so the next question is it ready? Should we be using web components? When can we use web components? And the cool part, again, I've been using it for over 2 years. We've actually, in Comcast, we've been using it since the 0.3 version, when it was it wasn't even beta, it was alpha. We were crazy. But it's come a long way. And right now, Google has numbers, because they're Google. Of course, they have numbers. But there's over 1.3 million pages serving Polymer elements. And it's really exploded, especially in Google, which we'll talk about. ING Direct. How many people know what ING is? I don't know how far some things go versus other things overseas. ING is a major financial firm. They're using components. and they absolutely love it. So we no longer build applications. We have and are enriching a module market source from industry and the ING global community. Modules are assembled into applications as the business requires. And that's actually a good summary of what we're doing at Comcast, is we're building components and then putting them together to build an application. Internally at Google, there are over 300 Google projects which are using this. And Rob Dotson, who's one of the core developers at Google, just says there's an explosion of people using web components in Google. And if Google's using it, it must be something good. So, do people like Google here? let me make sure. Some people like Google. I like Google. I think they're pretty great. They're getting big, but yes and no. Okay, we'll leave it at that, and then we can talk about it in Q&A. So there are over 300 projects using using Polymer internally. One of them is the Google Play Music, which probably not many people use this. I use Spotify, or at least my wife does, so that's kind of important. And they're using the 1.0 version of Polymer. Polymer is currently up to version 1.6.1, so they've come a long way. Another one is YouTube Gaming, probably another site that nobody really visits that much. They're trying to compete with Spotify and with Twitch and all the other sites that are out there. But yes, I can definitely attest that Polymer is ready for production. Again, we've been using it. We have 30 million customers who use our sites, and we're using Polymer components in production. We have been for over a year and a half. We started developing over 2 years ago. And it's quite good. I actually really love it. So now we're actually going to build a component in Polymer. I know this is what everyone's been waiting for, right? What the heck does a Polymer element look like? So we're going to build an alert banner. So this is just a banner that's going to be at the top of the page, which alerts the user that something cool happened on the site. And it's just a tag, right? That's the cool part about web components, is somebody builds the web component, and then it just becomes a tag for other developers to be able to use. So here we're going to create the alert banner. And in order to do it, you first import the Polymer file. So this is using HTML imports, and Polymer is an HTML file. And the cool part about HTML files is it automatically dedupes. So if you have 100 web components, and you load in all 100 web components, and all of them have an import for Polymer, the browser is going to read that. It's going to see it once, load it once, and then not load it for all the other components. So it does automatic deduping. I could probably talk more about HTML imports and why they're so cool later. Once you look at HTTP2, how many people are familiar with HTTP2? So the cool part about HTTP2 is it allows you to push resources from the server to the front end. And what that means is, in the future, another year or two from now, when you have hundreds of these HTML imports, the server is going to be able to say, hey, you're going to need all these other little pieces, and automatically send it over one HTTP request. So you're going to get a lot of performance out of using HTML imports in the future. So here we have the alert banner definition, and you'll already notice that it's a lot different than what we saw with the vanilla web components. They start off with this DOM module element, and I think this actually goes into details about it. So yeah, first you import all your dependencies. Right now we're only using the Polymer, but you could use other web components, and you just import them, and then you get that tag available. Next, they have this DOM module, which is actually a custom element that they're using to create other custom elements. Amazing, huh? Right? You use custom elements and to write other custom elements. It's the building blocks of the web. So you give it the ID of alert banner, which is to match the ID or the name of the element. And here's where they're using the template tag. And inside of there, you can actually put any kind of markup that you want. And Polymer will take that markup that you put in there and stamp it into the DOM. So it's a little different than the vanilla web components, where he was using the template string and putting the markup in the JavaScript file. This puts it in its own template markup. Does that make sense? It'll become clear as we go forward. So another thing, Polymer 1.0 is actually not using shadow DOM yet. They're using shady DOM. That's a cool play on words. And there's a big reason for that. When they first polyfilled web components, so Polymer is the one who wrote the web components polyfill, and they wrote shadow DOM, and it was huge, and it was really complicated to try to polyfill CSS markup in the browser. And what they discovered was it was hard and slow, so they ripped it out. And they created this other thing called shady DOM to temporarily kind of handle what shadow DOM was doing. And how shady DOM works is the name of the element, so alert banner, it prefixes all your CSS styles with .alert-banner. So it kind of encapsulates your styles in the element. And yeah, so that's why they did it. And they gave it a name, they call it local DOM. So now we're in this world where you have a web component that has a shadow DOM, which inside of its shadow DOM is its local DOM. And that represents the markup that's inherent in your web component. And that will become clear when we talk about the light DOM. So local DOM is the DOM an element is in charge of creating and managing. So that's anything put inside this template tag. And that will be like the alert banner. And so what we're going to do is we're going to style this alert. We're going to add a message, a div tag with class alert. And we're just going to say, hey, user, something cool has happened. And we're including the style tag, and that style will be applied only to the alert banner. Ooh. And so that's what it looks like. But obviously, that's not too cool yet, because we have to define your prototype. So this actually is not using any JavaScript yet. You just put Polymer is alert banner. So it kind of takes away the boilerplate of having to create a custom element. And on the screen, inside of your main HTML file, you would put the alert banner tag, just like that. All web components require a dash in them. So whenever you create a web component, you're going to have to do my dash something or alert dash something. And that's to differentiate it from native tags, like the div tag, the p tag, the h1 tag. They're all one word. So web components are automatically 2 words. That's part of the standard. And essentially, that alert banner will be rendered by the browser and look just like that. Pretty cool. Right, so we obviously don't want to say, hey, user, something awesome happened. So we want to be able to dynamically change that messaging. And in order to do that, Polymer has a content select, which is very similar to, what was the other thing from vanilla web components? It was spotting? Slotting. Okay, yeah, my accent is different. So I think it was originally called content in version 0 of the Web Components API. And version 1, they changed it to slot. But it does essentially the same thing. It will select any content with a .message. So what happens is it's going to look in its light DOM. And light DOM is any markup that you put inside of the alert banner tag. And we're going to see that in a second. Let's go forward a little bit. So here we have the alert banner tag, and we put a span in there with class message, and Polymer will know, hey, I see that message, I see your content select tag. It's going to grab success, your first component, and stick it into the local DOM of the Polymer element. I always get confused saying local and light DOM. It's two similar words, but it's pretty important. So again, it uses CSS selectors, the content tag. So you just put select.message. You could do IDs. You could do sub-p tags. You could just say h1 tag. You could put any CSS selector that you want there to get the content to inject into the shadow DOM element. Any questions so far? I think I still got everybody with me. It's pretty.
Does it also include the span tag itself?
That's a good question. I think it does. It might only be the text content. I'm not 100% sure.
It does.
It does include the span tag? Yeah, so it does include the span tag. Very good. I should know that. I've been using it for a while.
How would you import the web component into main HTML? Is it also HTML import?
Yeah, so if you wanted to use the alert banner on your index.html file, you would first put an import to alertbanner.html, and that would tell it to load up. And before you do your imports, you would first do the web components polyfill to make sure that it can be used. Chrome, again, has web components natively. We're waiting for all the other browsers to catch up. So now we can actually put a message in there, success, your first web component. And that's kind of like the power of web components is you can write something to create an alert banner, but you can change it outside of that or outside of the element itself. And just like how you have native components like the input checkbox here, one of the great things about it is you can add attributes. So the checked attribute is very simple. You add one flag, and what that does is it updates the front end to now have a checked inside of your checkbox. And Polymer elements are very similar to that. They're just extension of native HTML elements. And so here you can also do it in JavaScript. You can say input.checked equals true, and you're setting the attribute to be true. And Polymer elements are exactly the same. We're going to add a shown flag to the Polymer definition to tell the alert banner to show up or not. So in order to do that, you define properties for the alert banner. And here we're defining a property called shown. You have to define its type is Boolean, so true or false. The current value is, the default value is set as false. And notify true, we'll talk about notify in a second. Notify dispatches the event. So what happens is if the value changes, so the shown value changes, notify will say alert other people of the change. And that's part of Polymer's data binding system. So here, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want to use that property shown as part of the hidden attribute of the div class for alert. And hidden is a native attribute in DOM elements. So when hidden is true, it will hide the element. And when it's false, it will show it. So by default, the alert banner is going to be hidden. So here it's showing that we don't have shown equals true. And when you add the attribute, so it's just a matter of typing shown on the element, the component will show up on top because it removes the hidden attribute inside. And you can also do that with JavaScript. You could actually do document.query selector alert banner dot shown equals true or dot shown equals false to be able to turn it on and off. So that was an example of the alert banner, and it was a very simple example, but really where web components become powerful is when you're using lots of web components, and you're using other people's web components. Because it takes a couple minutes to build an alert banner, but if it's already built and you give it to someone else, then they can just start using it right away. You don't have to take the time to build it up again. So the cool part about Polymer is there's an element for that. Like if you need to do an alert banner, there's already an element for that. If you need to do a modal, there's an element for that. And that's actually one of the biggest things for Polymer is they spend a lot of time building up a whole lot of web components that you can start using out of the box. And yeah, this is actually part of like elements.polymer project. So they have two fundamental ones, iron elements and paper elements. Iron elements don't have any visualization to them, so they're very plain. Paper elements are built on top of the iron elements, and they implement material design. Everybody's familiar with material design? A couple people? Material design is Google's spec for how they do all their apps and websites. And then they also have Google Web Components. How many people have used any of the Google APIs? In JavaScript and everything. Well, that's cool. I guess a lot of people love Google. It goes back to that original point. So what they did was they actually took a lot of the different APIs that Google offers and they wrapped them in Polymer components. So you can actually, as we're going to do for the hands-on tomorrow, drop a Google map right on the screen, and it renders the Google map. And you can drop paper elements on there to do input tags. And you don't have to write any markup. And because of how Polymer does its data binding system, you can actually say, hey, when someone inputs a start address, just automatically send it to Google Map to update. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is you can just download the calendar element and start using it. And it has an API, which is very easy to use. And it's just an element. Here's a list of all the Google ones. Like I said, we're going to use Google Map tomorrow. Google Calendar, Google Analytics, Google Cloud. Basically, a lot of different Google APIs that you would normally use with just JavaScript. You can now drop a Polymer element in and use it pretty much the same way and define attributes on there. They're pretty awesome. I love using them. Next, we're going to talk about their Platinum elements. So they kind of did this periodic table thing with their components to kind of differentiate them. And their Platinum elements are kind of like the cutting edge, the next step of the evolution for the web. So one of their Platinum elements is for push notifications. How many people have done push notifications on the web? A couple people, yeah. That's actually the next thing that we have to implement at Comcast is push notifications, so I'm looking forward to using this element. But they make it very easy to just drop a web component into the page, and then you have push notifications. And they also have service workers. How many people are using service workers? How many people know what service workers are? All right, we got a few people. Service workers enable your website to be offline. Service workers, to make it easy to understand, is before the browser actually does a network request, it will hit the service worker API, which is a little JavaScript, which then has its own cache. So it can actually say, hey, if your network is offline, I'm going to render something from the cache. So now when you go to a website that has a service worker and the user doesn't have a network connection, you can actually present something different than the dinosaur, which is great. I think he has that slide in there somewhere. The next set of components that the Google Polymer team has produced is the gold elements. And their gold elements are mostly for e-commerce. How many people do e-commerce and have forms that they take user input? I hate doing forms. I haven't done forms in a really long time, which I'm kind of happy about. But Google actually has a whole bunch of Polymer elements to do it using the material design spec. So here has inputs, expiration, credit card validation, and it's in the material design theme. So when you put your cursor in there and you select it, the name on card slides up. It like animates really nicely. They do red error messaging if you have the wrong name on your card. Hopefully you don't have your wrong name on your card. Who knows? But that could happen. But they make it really easy to drop forms in, because these are just tags, and they have an iron form thing which does Ajax. But again, it's just getting a whole bunch of components, putting them on the page, and you now have a beautiful user experience for customers. And it didn't take that much time to do. And you don't have to debug it, because they spent a lot of time writing tests and making sure that it works. So here's a list of the gold components that they have: credit card input, credit card expiration, zip, phone, email, etc. And again, they allow you to quickly make forms for users in the material design. And if you want to check out any of these components, they're available at elements.polymer.project. The other great part that I really love about Polymer's components, they all have demo pages, they have great documentation, they're very easy to use, they're very easy to download. It's actually one line that you just do Bower. How many people use Bower? A lot of people use Bower. Yeah, I really don't like Bower that much because it's another package manager. They actually support NPM as well, but you can just do Bower install gold-email form, and that downloads the component, and then you can use it. So again, all the elements, you can check out the catalog at elements.polymer-project.org, and you can click through them and go into examples. They have demos, documentation, everything. It's pretty great. So the next time you have to build something on the web, there is an element for that. You don't have to build it from scratch. You can just go and look at the Polymer component and download it and start using it. So the next big thing is, okay, we have all these little components. How do you actually make an application out of these little components? And that's where Polymer actually has done a lot of work. And they built this Polymer starter kit. So how many people have used Polymer starter kit? Probably not many, right? Not many people know Polymer. Thomas knows everything about Polymer. So Polymer starter kit was Google's way of showing, hey, here's how you would build an application just using Polymer components. And you can go to the Polymer starter kit, you can Google it, and you download the starter kit. And out of the box, it gives you a responsive website, which uses service workers, push notifications, offline mode, cool sliding menus and everything. And it follows the material design. So out of the box, they give you app templates. So you don't start off with a blank screen. You actually get these cool cards, because nobody likes building a new website and having a blank screen. Sorry about that. Jet lagged, got a little bit of a cold going. It's a fun time. I took an espresso shot, so I'm caffeinated, highly caffeinated. I don't normally drink espresso or caffeine. So they have a nice slide-out navigation, which is great if you want to build an application from the start. If you have a fun hacker project that you want to do on the weekend, definitely check out the starter kit. It's also fully responsive. As you saw, it works completely on mobile. This is one of those long schnitzel dogs or whatever. My brother and sister have two of them. And material design is actually, the spec for material design is really good. They really take into account all the different platforms and handling responsive breakpoints well. So it's very easy to get started again for responsive. They also do app-wide theming. So if you don't like the default purple color, there's a whole website that you can go to which has about 20 different material design color schemes. And all you have to do is select which one you want. And using the CSS variables, you can actually apply the color themes to all the components in the app. And all of their Polymer components are easily themable using the CSS variables that we talked about in the vanilla web components. And the other thing is it does work in Microsoft Edge because the Polymer library actually polyfills it if you're using Polymer to work on there, and it uses the native for Chrome and Firefox. So if you wanted to make it green, all you have to do is set up some CSS variables to make it green, and it works. And now you have a green website rather than purple. I like green. Yeah, so some of the other cool parts that they've done, this is their mobile web. This is Google I/O. How many people have watched the Google I/O videos? Yeah, they're great. Definitely watch them regardless of what development you do, because they're kind of the future of where Google is going in Google Chrome. And this is showing like the offline support, or meta theming. So this is if you download the app, you can actually change the navigation bar at the top to make it look more native. They have icon support for all the mobile browsers, so if you're using a Windows phone versus an Android phone, and of course they don't show iOS because I guess they don't like them, but even an iOS phone, you get different icon sets. Again, they have service workers built in, so offline first mode. So once the application, the Polymer Starter Kit, is downloaded from your website, it will actually cache all the HTML and JavaScript and CSS needed for the site. So if a user comes back again, it will work offline. And so I already asked, nobody has set up a service worker before. It's a lot of boilerplate in order to do it. And that's why they give you a web component to kind of make it easier to configure, because there's an element for that. That's kind of like Google's answer and Polymer's answer for everything. There's an element to do service workers. So in order to do service workers, you download the Platinum service worker. You define what your cache is, what elements you want to register, and what happens is when you fetch. And it also includes push messaging. But basically, it will tell it, like, hey, if you always use this JavaScript file and you always use this HTML file, pre-download it, keep it in the cache, and if the user comes back to the site, just use the cache version. And again, it's set up for free if you use the Polymer Starter Kit, so check it out. But this is essentially how you would configure it. You set network first, which basically means check if they have a network connection. If they do, make the HTTP request, download the assets, and if not, return it from cache, from what they had before. The next big thing is productionizing a Polymer app. So they use Gulp. How many people use Gulp here? All right, a lot of people use Gulp. We also use Gulp. The Polymer guys really love Gulp, so they've been using that to build. And the Polymer Starter Kit includes a build process out of the box. It also includes a whole bunch of other things. Web Component Tester, so anybody who wants to write tests for web components, Web Component Tester is the de facto way to write tests. I'll talk about that a little bit more tomorrow. They also have linting out of the box. They have a process when you build called vulcanization. How many people know what vulcanization? Well, Thomas, yeah, thanks. So one of the problems right now with HTML imports is you have hundreds of import tags in the HTML document, and the browser has to make network requests for all of them to download them. So what vulcanization does is it goes through your main HTML file, and it takes all the dependencies and packages it up into one file for the browser to download once and not have to make hundreds of network requests until HTTP2 comes about, and then it becomes a lot faster. So definitely have to vulcanize. And it also actually sets up the service worker prefetch, and they include out-of-the-box support for browser sync. So if you make a change on your local development environment, browser sync will just re-render it in all different platforms. So you can actually have a mobile phone up and your normal browser, and it will change it in both places. I guess a lot of people use browser sync, right? Browser sync's pretty cool. Okay, not many people. Wow, I'm surprised. So download Starter Kit if you want to check it out. You can actually just Google for Polymer Starter Kit. So I added this one slide. Polymer is actually moving towards using a CLI tool. They call it Polymer CLI. And it kind of integrates everything into one node package. So you can actually do npm install Polymer CLI, and then you get the Polymer tool. And you can do Polymer init, which will give you a Polymer Starter Kit application out of the box with all of these things already. It also gives you a Polymer build, which does the vulcanization. I don't think it does deployment yet. That would be pretty cool if it did do deployment. I'm looking at Thomas. Have you checked out Polymer CLI yet? But they're trying to make it very easy to get started with using web components, and they're doing a great job with the tooling to make it easier so that you don't have to download all these sub-dependencies. You just get this Polymer CLI, and you can just run one command to build an application, to serve an application, so they use gulp serve with browser sync. So you get that for free by using it. And to wrap up, Polymer is lean and production ready. You can definitely start using it. You can create or reuse elements in any app. So that's, again, like the key for web components. I love web components. Again, I've been developing for 10 years. And I think web components are the biggest thing to happen to the web in probably the last 10 years' time. I'd be happy to argue about that, too, during the Q&A if anybody else wants to talk about it. Starter Kit or Polymer CLI, download them. It's really easy to get started with it. And if anybody wants to learn more about Polymer, you can check out this link. Rob Dotson, who created these slides, does polycasts. He has about 50-some videos out right now, which are 10 minutes long, which gives you a deep dive into the data binding system, how to write web components, accessibility with web components, testing web components, a whole bunch of information for you to really get started with it. And check out polymerproject.org. It has all the documentation. That's it. Thank you. So, are there any questions? And just for more detail, tomorrow I'm going to talk about how we've been using them at Comcast and some of the sites that we've built with it. And I go more into a deep dive of some of the pros that we found and some of the challenges that we face while building sites with just web components. And I also talk about our development environment and how we're writing components.
Hi, I got two questions. Is the CLI already finished?
The CLI is currently in beta, but you can download it and start using it. I assume that Polymer will make it 1.0 at the Polymer Summit, which will be happening in October.
And the second question is, have you ever tried some other frameworks like Angular 2 or something like that?
Yes. So I'm going to rail against Angular 2. I have checked out React. I like React. Vue.js is also good. I'm a web developer who really believes in simplicity. I really like simplicity. I checked out Angular 2, and Angular 2 has been in development for 3 years, which right there is a red flag for anything that takes a really long time to produce. It's obviously really complicated. It also introduces developers to ES6, you have to use ES6, you have to use TypeScript, where you can use TypeScript or not use TypeScript, but there's so many layers to learn on Angular. So that's one of the things I have against it. The other thing is I really like web components because it's native to the browser, and it's following a lot of things that we're already doing, which is accessing attributes and query selector elements and telling it to do things with normal vanilla JavaScript. So
we can discuss this today evening.
Yeah. Any other questions? That's it. Oh.
Hi, you've been talking about the gold elements, which are for e-commerce, and there have been fields for the phone and zip validation. Is it already for international use or only US formats?
Yeah, so I guess it could be for any. I haven't used any of the form elements. We don't do many forms on the sites that I've built. But they do have another element for internationalization, so you can actually change the language set. Also haven't had much time to use that. Our one site actually supports English and Spanish, and we do it differently than how Polymer team has introduced. But I assume they're international elements. And if not, they're open source projects, so you can submit a patch request to fix it. Cool. Thank you all for coming.
So, thank you, Chris, for your talk now. We will continue here around 4 o'clock with modern JavaScript with a 2-hour workshop. Marco is already preparing that. He will be your host for that. So you have 15 minutes, roughly 15 minutes of pause now. Get a drink on the 4th floor, and we see you soon at 4 o'clock.